Chapter 4 Slice of Life. Whatever jumble of broken muttering that was coming out of Deku's mouth shriveled and died, his eyes flying wide as he beheld what awaited them in the very center of the next circular room. Given the white walls and the pattern of the first 3 chambers, it was conceivable that this would be another opportunity for recovery, a breather after the last trial, to get them at least back to 0 so their shitty dancing was more lively for the amusement of their unseen audience. But what didn't quite fit with that was the fucking guillotine staring back at them, also painted white with its blade angled like a grin, glinting and underlit gruesomely by the floor lights. Katsuki pulled forward, walking upright, wasn't in his current list of skills, and as much as he hated it, he needed Deku. Deku, who had been drowned and burned and electrocuted, to help him totter over to the ancient execution device towering over them. Wait, Kachan. Affixed to the left post was a sticky note. Katsuki ripped it off, ignoring the continued pleas spilling from his companion. Scrawled in a smaller version of the same black marker, script from the previous room read the following. Sorry about the arm. Better get rid of it before it gets infected. Wouldn't want you to come to more harm. Without warning, Deku's knees buckled, collapsing to the floor and bringing Katsuki down with him. Oi, Katsuki barked, feeling his equilibrium shift and the world tilt under his feet as he hit the ground with a thud. Antidote or not, he was still feeling like he had been dragged across a highway behind a horse, on top of the sandpaper in his lungs, still producing more red than clear air. I can't, I can't cut off my arm. Deku was near hyperventilating, his left hand ghosted over his injury. It didn't look good. The makeshift blanket bandage was saturated red and yellow, grimy and soaked with sweat. Getting zapped probably didn't help it much either. They've been in this hellhole for less than a day, but who knew how long it would take until they escaped? Another day? A week? Never? Even if they didn't lose their lives, it was possible they'd lose other things, like limbs, especially if their only respite was time and not medical attention. You're not fucking cutting off your stupid arm, Katsuki spat, but it was weak and raspy. His usual growl was reduced significantly by whatever purple shit he had inhaled 3 times over in the last torture room. Deku burst out laughing. It wasn't the first time he had reacted to his horror with laughter, and similarly, again, it was devoid of any mirth. Katsuki found that he hated it. I've destroyed my arm. Over and over. And I've been finally taking care of it. And I'm going to lose it anyway. Oh my god. I'm going to lose my arm. Deku, Katsuki rumbled, snatching at the arm that wasn't in jeopardy. Will you just calm down? They're fucking with us. You don't know that. What if we have to do it to proceed? What if it's the trick to this room, like the fireplace? Oh no, the timer. Deku's head snapped up to the clock hanging over the exit, an identical triplet to the other 2 on either side of the restroom door. 9 hours left. Generous. But if it was the same as the first time, it was 9 hours until the next trial began. The door would likely open sometime before that, and something would probably explode. Katsuki stuck the sticky note directly to Deku's forehead, bringing those blinking green eyes back to focusing on him. They are fucking with us. He punctuated each word with a tap on the pink paper. Someone has been in here since your arm got roasted. They saw that happen, then came in here and stuck this shitty note on. Okay? We're not cutting off your arm. Then why is there a guillotine here? Deku asked quietly, peeling the note off his face. Opening his mouth to respond, Katsuki was seized by a fit of coughing, then a sudden punch to his sternum, sending his stomach for a loop. He tasted copper, and his hand was splattered in dark red droplets. Katsuki's eyes narrowed at it. A pair of worried green ones did too. Next to them on the floor, at the base of the guillotine, was a single bottle of water and 1 pillow. generous. Kotsky wiped his hands on his decreasingly white pants before snatching up the bottle and unscrewing the lid. He shoved it in Deku's face. The other boy looked at it like he wanted to protest. Kotsky was the one coughing up blood, after all, but all the more reason to not go first and contaminate it. Deku ultimately took the preferred water after briefly examining the menacing note for numbers and letting it flutter to the floor. Kotsky watched Deku's throat bob as he slowly, carefully drained half the liquid. Maybe this was poison too. Deku handed over the half-empty bottle and Kotsky downed the rest of it. Look, our priority right now is finding out when that, Kotsky rasped, wiping his mouth and jabbing a finger at the door, is actually opening. Then we can get some rest. He shook out the pillow before tossing it behind him, clear of the guillotine. We'll worry about old Slicey over here later. Are you okay to get up? Ears burning, Kotsky bit down on the urge to tell Deku to go fuck himself. What use was his pride when he couldn't stand? His pride couldn't search the room for clues. His pride couldn't save him. Couldn't save Deku. So he put it away for now. With some maneuvering using Deku's good arm and somewhat distressingly the guillotine, they managed to struggle themselves upright. Kotsky swept his gaze across the room. Like the one with the fireplace, it was all white. But there's where the similarities ended. This one was entirely circular and tiny, its walls composed of large layered brick. It felt like they were in a castle tower or a dungeon. The room was entirely dominated by the guillotine at its center. Lining the walls were a variety of empty picture frames, once again painted ghostly white. Kotsky nodded towards them, coughing into his fists. The two boys shuffled around the perimeter side by side, just as they had in the fireplace room, except they weren't physically chained together this time, now instead bonded even tighter by predicament and need, and perhaps something more. I hope they do mind me redecorating, Kotsky said dryly, running a hand across the frame and leaving a red streak. With a yank, he wrenched it off the wall. After checking the back, blank, he threw it to the ground with a clatter. The space the frame vacated was similarly fruitless. They continued this until nearly all of the wall was bare, until the second-to-last picture frame didn't budge. Bingo. Kotsky allowed himself to grin, withdrawing his arm from Deku's shoulder to get both hands around his prize. He pulled and yanked and twisted and shoved. He grit his teeth as Deku joined in with one arm, adding what little strength he could. But their combined effort got them nowhere, with the frame remaining solidly stuck to the wall. Maybe if they had been at full capacity, they could have gotten it off, but they were both drained. I hate this place, Kotsky snarled. I hate this place so fucking much. Me too, Deku chuckled humorously, expletives and all. Kotsky's eyebrows quirked at that. Yeah, let's hear it then. The red that flushed across Deku's ears and cheeks was adorable. Adorable? Christ, but this place was really fucking with Kotsky's mind. Not this time, Kachan. Let's focus. Kotsky hummed. He kept pulling at the picture frame, but he couldn't keep the smile that had curled up the corners of his mouth. Deku stopped moving, the teasing forgotten. He was swept away in a sudden muttering storm, unintelligible words spilling rapid fire from his lips. Kotsky watched quietly, surprised at his own patience. After a minute or so of nonsense, Deku caught up the chain attached to his ankle with his left hand, shaking it in Kotsky's face. Leverage, Kachan. We can barely get a grip on the frame, which means we can't pull very hard, but if we attach the chain to it, I think we can get a link around the knob at the top. We'll be able to pry it right off. With your legs still attached to it? Deku twirled the end of the chain lightly, then inclined his head towards the center of the room. Actually, Kotsky's eyes widened. You want to use that fucking thing? Not to cut my arm off, Deku protested, but if we can use it to remove the chains, we'll have them as a tool and a weapon, and they won't be hindering us anymore. Fine, whatever, Better plan than staying awake for more than 8 fucking hours. Katsuki let Deku loop his arm around his waist, and they ambled over to the intimidating piece of machinery, the guillotine. Okay, Deku said shakily, disentangling himself from Katsuki to crouch down by the business end of it. You pull on the thing, and the, blade will go up, and I'll feed the chain through, and then you drop it when I say go, okay? Do you think you can hold it that long? The hell do you take me for, shitty nerd? Katsuki groused, pulling down the hand over hand on the rope to raise the heavy-weighted blade. It wasn't easy, and Katsuki was definitely exerting himself, but like hell he was going to accidentally chop off Deku's fingers. Wonder if this could cut through the shackles, too, Deku muttered as he sat back on his rear and began to shove the links through the circular opening. Meant for someone's fucking head. Katsuki grunted. If this thing can slice through the cuffs, it sure as hell can take your foot off with it. You ready? Ready. The shackle was around Deku's right ankle, held up awkwardly, and he twisted away from it, with his left arm wrapped protectively around his head and mangled right arm as much as possible. Something clenched in Katsuki's chest at the sight. Bombs away. Katsuki let go, and in the blink of an eye the blade had dropped, hitting home with a deafening crash, slicing cleanly through the chain. It was so fast Katsuki couldn't keep track of it. His heart stuttered. If he had slipped, there wouldn't have even been time to give a warning. Christ. That wasn't so bad. Deku beamed a hesitant grin up at Katsuki. Your turn? Huh? Katsuki snapped. You can't operate this thing one-handed. No fucking way. Oh. Deku looked crestfallen. Katsuki rolled his eyes. Idiot. It's fine. Let's just get this stupid shit off the wall. We're wasting time. I need a nap like fuck. Deku retrieved the chain from the other side of the guillotine, and with Katsuki's help, and giving some of his own, they attached the end link to a sturdy metal decorative knob that jut out of the top center of the frame, almost like a hook, almost as if it had been designed for this exact purpose. A sour feeling wormed its way into Katsuki's stomach. This is all some stupid setup. Using the chain isn't clever. It's what they wanted us to do. Deku looked at him, browsing it together, over confused eyes. Well, of course it is, Kachan. It's a puzzle. Maybe there are multiple solutions, but they have to give us a way to solve it, right? And with so little here, he glanced around the barren room, the chain was naturally what we'd come to. Katsuki scowled. If he had left Deku to die in the water, he wouldn't have the chain with him anymore. If Deku had picked the key over the antidote, and Katsuki had perished, he also wouldn't have it. Unless Deku dragged his dead body with him into the next room. They knew exactly what choices they were going to make, because they weren't really choices at all. He really, really fucking hated this place. Katsuki yanked on the chain. Nothing. He planted his feet on the wall and strained against it with what little strength he had left, and Deku pulled on the chain with his left arm. Fucking die already, Katsuki roared, but it had little effect. Are you kidding me right now? He gasped. The chain fell from his shaking fingers, and he slumped against the wall, sliding onto the floor. He buried his face into his hands, blood in his ears pounding instantly against his skull, making him dizzy and lightheaded, copper soured on his tongue. I can't, Deku. The words tasted foul, and his stomach curled. Unwelcome tears gathered hot and angry behind his eyelids. Hey, it's okay, the voice above him said uncertainly. We can take a break. The number is probably low. We can rest a little. We didn't even find the first one until a few hours in. Katsuki grit his teeth. All the more reason for this number to be 5 fucking minutes, he hissed. He raised his eyes, glaring furiously at the guillotine standing proudly before them. Too bad we can't just chop it up. At least I can still put that stupid shit. Deku moves silently over to the final picture frame, pulling it down from the wall. Nothing on it, nothing behind it. Just checking, he whispered. Maybe inside the pillow? Wait, Katsuki bit out. His heart began racing as the beginning of an idea tingled in his run-down brain. Maybe we can use it. Oi, help me up. He held his hand out to Deku, who looked at it with wide eyes for a moment before pulling Katsuki upright. He motioned to the aforementioned device, and they moved over to it. See if there's anywhere on the top of the blade we can attach the chain. There's a few big bolts. It won't reach, though, Deku pointed out, gesturing to the chain that trailed behind them as his head pulled taut. It would just make it to the base of the guillotine. Perfect. What? Look, nerd. Katsuki pointed to the top of the structure. At the top of it, it'll be level with the knob on the frame, and the distance is shorter. We hoist the blade up, attach it, then let her fall. If the chain is stronger than the glue or whatever, it pulls the shit off the wall. Boom. Pythagorean theorem. Deku stared at Katsuki blankly for a moment before the gears started turning. Oh, of course! He grinned, goofy and lopsided. Kachan's so smart. Don't fucking get ahead of yourself. We still have to get you up there to attach it. Oh, right. Katsuki chewed on a fingernail as he looked the guillotine up and down. Alright. I think if you stand on my shoulders, I can still pull the rope. You'll have to lean on the post with your stomach, and you might need to use your bum arm. Think you can handle that? Deku wasn't looking at Katsuki. He had turned bright red. Oi, shitty Deku. You listening to me? You think you can handle it? They both couldn't bring their arms to wrap around his face, so only the left one curled into its normal position of embarrassment. Kachan, Deku squeaked out. I'm not wearing pants. Katsuki snorted. Yeah, I fucking know. Your junk and ass have been on display this whole time. Can you handle it or what? Kachan, Deku squeaked out, clearly mortified. If I stand on your shoulders... What? Why was he acting this embarrassed about nudity when their lives were at stake? And why were Katsuki's ears burning? Oh my god, Deku, he spluttered. Like we haven't been at an onsen together, changed in locker rooms at the same time. We just shared a blanket fucking naked. Need I remind you, this is a matter of life and death, and we don't have time for your schoolgirl bullshit. I won't look at your goddamn dick. Now get the fuck on my back. Katsuki was practically frothing, his unbridled rage in contrast to the big deal such as a thing supposedly wasn't. They had known each other their entire lives and had seen each other nude plenty of times. Katsuki didn't give a fuck about nudity anyways. Why was it suddenly awkward? Deku said nothing, but stopped tugging at the front of his tattered robe with the hand on his injured arm. He nodded and silently moved to stand behind Katsuki. He had looked like he was about to cry. Katsuki hated this place. Okay, Katsuki breathed, dropping into a crouch. He scooped up the chain from behind him, handing it to Deku, who took it gingerly in his right hand, wincing. Arm's length from the post was enough slack to reach up. Up, Katsuki ordered. Deku climbed onto his shoulders, with his bare feet curling to grip as best as they could. The few links still remained on his right shackle, draped cold across Katsuki's back. Ready? Yeah, ready. With a deep breath, Katsuki began to rise, pulling himself up, hand over hand on the guillotine post, relying entirely on his arms. The added weight was excruciating. The burn under his shackles, which he had been largely ignoring, flared with a sharp pain that shot in piercing waves up his entire leg. His muscles strained, sweat bursting out of every pore, and he clenched his teeth so hard he could feel it all the way through his jaw into his skull. Why did he think he could do this? He couldn't even stand on his own. Kachan's amazing, came whispered reverently from above him. Fuck yes, Kachan's amazing. With a harsh, guttural grunt, Katsuki pushed himself and his hitchhiker all the way up to the full height. He was panting hard, leaning his head against the post in an effort to catch his breath and calm his speeding heartbeat. He knew he had to move. Just holding Deku upright was effort, and this wasn't resting. But God, if he could just have a second. No, he set his mouth in a grim line. He couldn't, carefully moving his hands from the post to the pulley without jostling Deku too much. He began to raise the blade. It was much, much harder this time around. Inch by inch it moved upwards, little by little, breath by breath, strain by strain, sweat drop by sweat drop, until finally it hit the apex, and Deku shakily leaned forward, fumbling to affix the chain to the blade. Fumbling. Deku! Katsuki hissed between his clenched teeth, his entire body racked with violent tremors as his grip threatened to give out. Sorry, oh my god, I've almost got it. Got it! Katsuki nearly let go. It would have been so easy. Get down, he wheezed. For once in his life, Deku didn't question it. He scurried gracelessly down the post and off Katsuki's shoulders, as quickly as he could, only with one functioning arm. Now! Katsuki let the rope rip from his hands as he dove out of the way, dragging Deku with him. Not half a moment later, the guillotine crashed down, followed immediately by the picture frame smashing into it. The chain whipped over their heads, just shy of decapitating them. Bits of wood and plaster pelted Katsuki's bare back, but it did no real damage. Fuck, he groaned, flopping down onto his stomach next to Deku. Every single inch of his body screamed in agony. His gas tank was empty. Well and truly at 0. I don't believe it, Deku whispered next to him. Huh? Katsuki picked his head up as much as he could, following Deku's line of sight. Written on the wall, where the picture frame had been, were the numbers they were looking for. 0013. 13. The same fucking number from the first white room. Wow. That's great. Just fucking great. You know what? Fine. Fuck everything. I'm passing the fuck out. Wake me up. Never. And Katsuki passed the fuck out. This time, when Katsuki woke up in that nightmare, Deku's face hovering over him was only an unwelcome sight because of the confirmation that they were still in it. His hair was a bedraggled disaster, even more so than usual, wild mess of green curls sticking out in every direction, including plaster to his forehead. Dark circles hung under droopy red-rimmed eyes, and the vivid emerald color muted and lacking in its usual luster. Even his freckles seemed to have paled along with his skin over the duration of their inhospitable stay. It was the best and worst thing to wake up to. Sorry, Kachan, Deku said softly. He sounded like he had been crying. I wanted to let you sleep longer, but I'm afraid I'm about to faint, and I don't want us to miss lucky number 13. Katsuki glanced up at the clock, rolling his head on the pillow that had at some point been wedged under it. 2 hours left. 2 hours left? He sprang up in a seated position, pulse racing, brimming with renewed energy, despite the overwhelming feeling of having been hit with a truck still being quite present. Shitty nerd, you idiot, he snarled. You let me sleep for over 6 fucking hours? We have to split it. What the hell is wrong with you? Sorry, Deku repeated half-heartedly, tugging the pillow towards him and immediately tipping forward down into it on his left side. He sighed, curling his knees up to his chest, heedless of how it affectedly pointed his bare backside right at Katsuki. Fuming, Katsuki bit down on the lecture he burned to deliver. The idiot was already out like a light. And since he had barely left himself any time at all to sleep, Katsuki wasn't about to keep him awake by yelling at him, even if he really, really wanted to. Fuck. Katsuki dragged his fingernails across his grimy scalp, trying to bring his sleep-addled brain to full power. Had Deku really sat here for 6 hours watching Kachan sleep, effectively alone? Sure, Katsuki had spent about as much time watching over Deku after he had drowned, but the nerd had woken up halfway through it, on top of the fact that Katsuki was just cold and a little tired at that point. He didn't have untreated third-degree burns eating away at him. And if he was being honest, the skin-to-skin proximity had been soothing to Katsuki too. Not that he would ever tell anyone that. Deku looked so small, so fragile. Katsuki knew he wasn't, even without the use of his quirk. Deku was a survivor, but coiled into a ball, snoring lightly, his right arm draped stiffly down his side, standing as a gruesome reminder of the danger they were in. He looked far younger and frailer than he was, and he had given up a chance at sleeping almost a full 4 hours so Katsuki could sleep 6.
Katsuki hated him, and yet he found himself absent-mindedly running his fingers through Deku's hair before he snatched his hand away. What the fuck was he doing? He scooted back a foot or so, heart hammering in his chest. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? I never even got to tell you. Well, you probably knew. You're amazing after all. No, this wasn't happening. Not here, not now, not ever. This was just some trauma-induced need to seek comfort in a time of extreme stress or some shit. Katsuki was suddenly grateful for Deku's martyrdom because it meant he didn't have to spend quite so long alone with his traitorous thoughts. It was going to be a long hour. With 45 minutes to go, Deku began to stir on his own accord. Dumbass wasn't even taking the entirety of what little time he had allotted with himself. With a quick movement, Katsuki pushed himself away from where he definitely wasn't letting the nerd's gross foot drape across his shin. Go back to sleep, idiot. Kashan? Deku yawned. I want to be up. I'm up. He looked like a sleepy kitten, and again, what the actual fuck? Rubbing at his eyes, Deku winced sharply as he jostled his right arm in an effort to sit up. His breathing was rapid and shallow, and he frankly looked worse than he had when he had gone to sleep. How's the arm? Katsuki wasn't sure why he asked. He knew the answer. Bad. Figured. Silence stretched between them for what felt like the first time since they had been forced into it underwater. They had rarely stopped yelling at each other, and now suddenly Katsuki was at a loss for anything to say. Even Deku, with his muttering that never seemed to have an off button, was quiet and subdued. Their eyes were trained on the countdown clock. They were probably both thinking the same thing. What was going to happen at 13 minutes? Would they sustain further injury from it? Would they survive the next room? When they were both barely clinging to life to begin with? Would only one of them? I can't watch you die anymore. The words were soft and barely audible, and still Katsuki turned incredulous eyes on his companion, a familiar fury flickering under his breastbone. That's rich, when I've had to watch you croak away more times, asshole. Deku's morose expression quickly twisted to something defiant. Some of that light that had gone missing returned to his glimmering eyes. No? Did you forget about the entire last room we just went through, where you took 5 penalties? I didn't take 5 penalties, idiot, Katsuki sneered, and I had to watch your stupid body get electrocuted and go limp for like 3 minutes. Struggling up to standing like a wobbly baby deer, Deku balled his left fist and shook it. His voice also shook. I had to watch that too, and it was 5. The heat, the electricity, and 3 poison attacks. 5. And then you died. You died, Kachan. Katsuki was on his feet before he realized he didn't need help to stand up anymore. His brain raced over the events of the past room. He had really taken 5 penalties to get Deku through the chambers as unscathed as possible. Well, so did you, Katsuki bit back, stomping forward until he pushed right into Deku's face. How do you think I felt seeing your corpse floating at the bottom of a pool? Had to drag you out. Your heart stopped. You weren't breathing. I had to give you mouth to mouth. He was shouting, now, though he really didn't know why. All of the remaining color drained out of Deku's face. You... what? Huh? You don't remember? Oh, of course he didn't remember. He was dead. Deku's left hand came to hover over his lips, his eyes wide and panicked. I've never... The feeling of his ears burning was one that was happening far too frequently, and Katsuki was starting to despise it almost as much as he loathed everything else about his life right now. It wasn't a kiss, you dickhead. Even if that's exactly what had gone through Katsuki's mind when he was doing it. Tears began to cascade down Deku's cheeks as his entire face scrunched up, turning a familiar shade of bright red. He clutched at his hair. My first kiss? And I don't even remember it? It wasn't a... Katsuki choked on his words. He began breathing heavily through his nose. Upset that you don't remember it? Not Not that it was me? A wet laugh gurgled out of Deku's throat. For once, actual, genuine, and not response to fear. His lower lip trembled as he struggled to smile. Why would I be upset that it was Kachan? Why would I want it to be anyone else? Koski seized the label of Deku's grungy, borrowed robe in his shaking fist, stared down at the wet green eyes and a tired, dirty, somehow still infuriatingly charming face. His jaw clenched. His nostrils flared. I told you, it wasn't a kiss. This is. And he yanked him unceremoniously forward, crashing their mouths together. Truth be told, despite his cavalier comments in the electricity chamber, Koski was no more experienced at this than Deku was. He knew the basic mechanisms from watching movies and his parents, but that mostly flew out the window when he just kind of went for it. They were both filthy. Koski tasted blood and sweat and pain, not mint and sunshine and roses and whatever the hell kisses were supposed to taste like. But under the grime and desperation was a current that connected them. Above all else, it just tasted right. They broke apart like they had come together, violently, stumbling backwards and gasping, staring wildly at each other, chests heaving, the magnitude of the situation crashing down heavily on both of them. What are we doing? Deku whispered, his tone less of a question and more of a plea. Why do this now, when they're just going to die anyway? Getting out of here, Koski hissed. That was it. He had enough. They tried it Deku's way, playing these little games, but Koski was done. No way he was just going to turn belly up and die in some 2-bit villain's torture chamber when he still had this shit to figure out. Casting wildly about the room, Koski grappled onto the first plan that struck him, throwing whatever little caution he had left straight to hell. He stormed over to the guillotine and began raising the blade. Kachan? When the weight's at the top, Koski grunted. Pull the chain. Topple it over. It'll land right under the air vent. Deku gaped at him. His left hand immediately came over to hover over his injured, useless arm. I know you can only use one arm, and you got 2 seconds of sleep, shithead. But I also know you can do it. Plus ultra. Setting his mouth in a crooked, determined grin, Deku nodded. He caught up the chain as he hurried into place. Plus ultra. When the blade was fully raised, Deku pulled, yelling, and Koski angled the rope to add his own force. Slowly but surely, the entire contraption began to tip, raising the base entirely off the floor, until gravity took over and the top wedged itself right between the bricks, a foot or so under where the ceiling met the wall. After a few harsh tugs to secure it, then gently lowered the blade back to the bottom, hoping the guillotine wouldn't just stand itself back up. It remained in place. Koski blew out breath he had been holding. He detached the chain from the blade and then began to scale the entire structure like a rungless ladder. At the top, he wrapped the links around his fist. Then he punched out the air vent cover. Come on, Deku, Koski called back as he hoisted himself up into the air duct, his own shackles and chain dripping out behind him. Won't they just come after us if we're being watched? Despite the hesitancy and the labored breathing, Koski could hear Deku ascending, albeit a bit slower, with just the use of one arm. When he reached the top, Koski extended his arm down. Deku looked up at him with something unreadable in his expression, but he took his hand anyway. Koski pulled him up into the small passageway. Probably. Koski shrugged. It was completely unwarranted, but he couldn't help the feral grin that spread across his face. But at least we're not just following some shitty preset puzzle. It's a whole new game. Biting his lip, Deku nodded, his brow lowered, and his eyes fierce. If it's with Kachan, I'll take those odds.